Kung may pakialam kayo sa sistema ng edukasyon sa Pilipinas, dapat nyong subaybayan ng mga nilalabas na resulta ng mga pag-aaral pagsasaliksik ng EDCOM 2. At in case hindi nyo pa alam, ang EDCOM 2 ay tinipon simula pa noong taong 2023 para pag-usapan ang problema ng edukasyon sa Pilipinas after the Philippines' poor performance in the most recent PISA and in the past. Nasa ikatlong taon na sila ngayon ng kanilang pagpupulong at kamakailan ay nilabas nila ang kanilang Year 2 report na nagsasaad ng kanilang mga nalaman tungkol sa katayuan ng edukasyon sa Pilipinas at yung mga aksyon na nire-recommenda nila para sa pagsasaayos ito, and it is not good.
In your Year 2 report, EDCOM 2 said that students are progressing to grade 4 despite only being at grade 3 or grade 2 in terms of actual learning. In one of your visits, you said that grade 8 or grade 9 students are struggling in the lessons they should have learned when they were in grade 4.
When we saw the PISA results, at grade 10, nakita natin 75% of Filipino learners have no basic minimum proficiencies. And so when you track it down pala, what we found in a UNICEF study that is about to be released is that these gaps start very early on. Grades 1 to 3 pa lang, the gaps already emerge. What are we saying? In the study, they found that at grade 3, or those who progress to grade 4, many of them are 1 to 2 years behind pre-COVID. Meaning to say you're grade 3, but actually what you know is grade 1 level.
Okay.
But the pandemic worsened it to 3 years.
Okay.
Meaning to say you could be at grade 4 now, but what you know is kinder or grade 1 level. We see that in terms of progressing in the entire education system, bit-bit nila yung difficulty na ito all the way to high school.
Susugan ko na yung principals.
Yeah.
Sa report nyo din, nabanggit nyo, you mentioned that the Philippines lack 25,000 school principals. So that's basically half of the public school system.
Yes.
Na wala palang principal.
Yeah. Napakaraming schools, mali-mali din naman yung principal. May mga schools kaming nakita, 100 teachers, walang principal.
Okay.
So, how are we doing it, no? And then we are seeing that there are so many unfilled principal positions. Pero may 6,000 or almost 7,000 na pumasa dun sa NQuest or sa principal's test. So we are really trying to understand why are there delays in the appointments? Why are we not requesting for principal positions? Why are we not updating the 1997 policy that says if you have 9 teachers, tsaka ka lang magkaka-principal? Our backlog in classrooms, 165,000. The backlog is worth 20 years at this current pace. I-improve pa natin yung design. Bago natin mapuntahan lahat, hindi nga tayo makapag-repair sufficiently ng mga school buildings. A lot need repair already, but we don't have sufficient resources for it.
In your report, you said that 62% of the teachers are teaching the subject they did not major in.
In high school, the law requires, and actually what we expect, is that you should be teaching your specialization.
Right.
But we find that 62%. Malala pa sa ibang courses. Physical sciences, 98%. Teaching, no background in it. 50% of our teachers handling science, no background in it. And on the ground, din yung sinasabi sa amin ng mga teachers, Sir, how can I teach well? Filipino yung inaral ko, pinapaturo sa akin mathematics. English yung inaral ko, kasi we have the most graduates English daw. English yung teacher natin, pinaturo natin MAPE.
Sobra yung underfunding natin. Like for example, per child, we're only allocating 3,800 per child. Pero yung global average for low-income and middle-income countries is around 8,000.
Yes.
So that's like below half pa yung average.
Yeah.
I mean, mapapatanong ka na lang kung sa lahat ng yan kung paano tayo nakarating dito. Like, what the hell happened? I mean, it's not my intention to criticize EDCOM 2. They are doing very important work at gusto ko silang magtagumpay sa kagustuhan nila na ayusin ang sistema ng edukasyon sa Pilipinas. But there is no escaping the fact that the numbers they have found tell a story of years of neglect, incompetence, and obvious corruption within the system across several administrations. This is not just a BBM or Duterte or Aquino issue, matagal na ito. At paano mo pa nga ba ipapaliwanag kung bakit tayo umabot sa kalahati ng mga public school na walang principal, may 1,500 paaralan na walang kuryente o CR? Ginawa nilang palabas ang magpatayo ng mga paaralan para hingin ang inyong mga boto sa halalan kahit wala silang plano kung paano susuportahan ng mga paaralan sa mga tungkulin nito. And honestly, to me, the most disturbing thing is the tone of surprise at the discovery that Filipino students are 4 to 5 years behind expected literacy standards, because teachers have been sounding the alarm on students falling behind on their skills and knowledge for well over a decade now, even before the pandemic made things much worse than they already were. So, at this point, EDCOM2 has already published a long list of recommendations and touted some new programs aimed at, quote, fixing the foundations of our education system. But honestly, the solutions they propose feel, to me, a lot like uninspiring and unimaginative band-aid solutions that don't really get to the root of the problems. And kailan lang ay may sinulat ako sa Rappler kung saan sinabi ko na kung sistema ang problema, nararapat na buwagin ang sistema at palitan ng bago, from the foundations to the support systems to the intended ceiling, because it's not enough anymore to make simple reforms and renovations on the system if everything it is built upon is rotten. But there is an elephant in the room that EDCOM has not acknowledged, which is the larger systemic problem that is the root of all of these other problems. And it is an issue that I acknowledge is simply beyond the abilities of EDCOM to address. But they could still use their platform now to point it out, because it is consequential enough to render all their efforts meaningless. And I hate to be that guy, but it's capitalism. Education systems like ours were patterned after the mass education system designed by the United States during the Industrial Revolution. It emphasized standardization and efficiency in line with the scientific management principles that ran the factory systems. It was intended to produce an army of factory workers who were largely expected to do only as they were told, obeying orders unquestioningly and remaining submissive to their authorities. And that submissive part, by the way, was critical, because these workers were expected to work under unhealthy and dangerous conditions and receive exploitative wages. Hence, the system required people who were desperate enough as to have no other option but to take those jobs. In other words, if the system, until today, continues to produce graduates who seem to be trapped in a future of menial, low-paying jobs, it is because the system is designed to keep producing them. So, true enough, traditional classrooms encourage very little independent thinking and autonomy on the part of the student. They tend instead to feature a cycle of information transmission by the teacher, followed by the students replicating the procedures and then regurgitating the facts that they are fed. The teacher in this system acts as the sole authority, as both the source of information and instructions on what and how to do things, and they also serve as the judge as to how well students are meeting their expectations. Basically, teacher says, do this, students do as they are told, then the teacher tells them how well they did it. So the emphasis in traditional classrooms has always been obedience and following instructions, which leads to students becoming entirely dependent on authority. And to make things worse, we sometimes impose penalties depending on the seriousness of students diverging from said instructions. And I'm not saying instructions are bad, but sometimes we don't leave enough room for discovery and creativity, which are powerful experiences in education. And sure, there are some schools that practice alternative pedagogies that emphasize more autonomy and critical thinking. Pero, syempre, hulaan nyo na lang kung aling mga school ang karaniwang may mga ganong programa. So, here's what EDCOM has thus far failed to acknowledge. While it's true that every school will have their share of problems of quality in teaching, resources, and infrastructure, these problems disproportionately affect children in poor and marginalized communities. And children in those schools are already starting a couple of laps behind their counterparts in more privileged schools that have quality textbooks and libraries, who attract the best teachers with better working conditions. Children who can afford private tutoring, who have access to gadgets and the internet, who don't need to work to support their families, who need not worry about the weather in their air-conditioned vehicles and comfortable classrooms. And then, on top of all that, due to the differences in quality of life in schooling, those students in marginalized schools understandably fall further and further behind. Look, the fact of the matter is, school reform is not going to level the playing field. There are significant problems that affect learning in school that are simply beyond the scope of what schools can or should have to address. Teachers cannot be expected to do anything about poverty, about hunger, or unequal access to services and resources. But those problems, you see, are features, not bugs, of a social context that prioritizes maximizing profit for the few over the well-being of all human beings. In a system that judges a person's worth by how much profit they can produce for others, some people must be left behind, because such a system requires that a sector of the population remains so poor as to be desperate enough to take the low-paying jobs that ensure high profits for the wealthiest people. Poverty is not just a challenge for individuals to overcome. It is a feature of a system meant to trap people in the so-called, quote, unskilled minimum wage jobs, essential in keeping a capitalist society up and running. And a quick aside on those unskilled jobs. Remember, at the height of the pandemic, who were the workers we needed to keep doing their jobs? It was the delivery riders, cleaning crews, kitchen crews, market vendors, electricity and telephone linemen. An entire society became completely dependent on low-wage workers to keep functioning, while the rest of us were trapped at home. So here's what I believe. No person who puts in a full day's work should be earning poverty wages. If you work full-time, regardless of the nature of your work, whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, or a janitor, hindi ka na dapat nag-aalala kung may mailalatag kang pagkain sa mesa, kung may matutulugan ka sa gabi, at kung mauubos lahat ng ipon mo tuwing may magkasakit sa inyong pamilya. That is justice. So, the best education systems in the world, like say Finland, operate on a simple principle: ensuring equitable access to quality education and the unyielding belief that every child has the ability to thrive in life in their own niche. And they do this by making education free at every level and providing immediate and continuous support to every child who may struggle with both the traditional mode of schooling or keeping up with traditional definitions of academic success. That is what it really means to leave no child behind. And those things can be achieved by investing a lot of money in both the education system and in the professional development of our teachers. And question, do we have the money to do this too? Yes. Are our leaders worried about spending too much money on education? Yes, and that is the problem. But it should be emphasized that even if the financial investment could hurt in the short term, significant investments in education are inherently and inevitably tied to long-term economic and social progress. So I do not believe there is such a thing as spending too much on education. Like, really, what is stopping us from doing these things other than maybe some hesitation that the poor are not worth investing money in? This should be a no-brainer. Investing in education will raise quality of life and productivity in every other aspect of our nation. We have the money to do this. But is that what the people in power want? Side note lang. Naalala ko nung ilang taon na nakalipas nung sinabi ni Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago na takot ang mga kurakot na politiko sa edukadong mamamayan dahil alam nilang katapusan nila ito. Keeping people uninformed and gullible is essential to the survival in power of incompetent people with insidious motives. At hanggat nadadala ang mga tao sa sayaw-sayaw, pagpapatawa at mga nakasanayan ng pangalan na wala naman ginagawa, mananatili ang mga taong ito sa kapangyarihan at ang Pilipinas na lugmok sa kahirapan. So, if our leaders are serious about fixing the education system, they must also fight to address inequality by doing something about people's wages, about food security, public housing, and universal healthcare. Feeding programs are good, but they are band-aids at best, and children who do not have their basic needs met cannot be expected to learn effectively. And to be clear, this is not unheard of. Countries across Europe provide their citizens with universal health care and free education. Finland has all but eradicated homelessness by providing housing benefits. Wages are closer to the standard cost of living because workers are not only allowed but encouraged to unionize. Teachers there are not only highly regarded but paid accordingly to this stature in society. And this can all be done if a community cares more about the least among them than ensuring that the wealthiest can keep hoarding more wealth. It is past time to tear down the entire monolithic system of our education that only succeeds at producing more of the faceless rank and file workers of the capitalist machine. And we must build in its place a thriving ecosystem that allows every child to flourish in the things that they do best and doesn't just trap them in narrow definitions of success in academics or profit-driven labor. We need a system that allows them to grow and thrive as independent thinkers who will question and challenge the norms, who are willing to explore and innovate and won't settle for the tried and tested and tired status quo of decades or centuries past. In general, if we want school reform to have any effect on our society, it must come with a sweeping systemic social change built on a redefinition of our values as people, on how we treat the least among us. We need a complete cultural upheaval that shifts our values from measuring our society by the amount of profit the wealthiest can accumulate to measuring society by the quality of life of the least of us in our communities.